The HBCU rankings are in, and North Carolina Central is rightfully at the top of the list. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And now, of course, Sam Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey's over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket through YouTube or YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. We'll wrap up today's episode with an interesting look at the attitude between HBCU teams playing FBS opponents and HBCU teams playing Division II opponents. These are two different subdivisions, and I think it's interesting the attitude is drastically different, but not in the way that you would think. In segment 2, we're going to look at the beginning of the Keaton Wright era at Clark Atlanta because it got off to a bang, and I'm talking about explosive offense by your future SIAC Player of the Year, because that's what it looks like David Wright will be yet again. North Carolina Central kicks off today's episode, and I'm glad that they had the opportunity to, because I really wanted them to be the opening segment on the first episode of the week, our Labor Day episode. But everything that was going on with Alabama State quarterback situation was such a big deal. I wanted to attack that first more than I wanted. I just felt like it was the proper thing to do, right? But I'm glad that I have an opportunity to say this. North Carolina Central is the best team in HBCU football. That's what they've shown thus far. I don't think there's anybody else who has looked better than North Carolina Central, in my opinion, right? And you got to factor in who they play. I think that Jackson State had a good performance against University of Louisiana Monroe. That's a good opponent. Like, you got to factor these things in. But Central having what we already expected them to have, right? Because expectations coming into the season matter in week 1, right? Like, if you're a bad team, if you're expected to be a bad team, and you come in and you have a great game, you're not going to shoot up to number 1, because people are going to question, all right, is this really who they are? But if you were already top dog, for example, Central was second in these rankings only to Alabama State, and they beat Alabama State. So if you're number 2 and you beat number 1, you're going to be number 1. And I think that this is fair. I know a lot of people have conversations about whether or not Central should have been ahead of Howard in the MEAC rankings. There's conversations to be had. But if I'm just basing it off of the first game for most people and the first 2 games, if you look at FAMU, because Norfolk State and Delaware State aren't a part of this conversation. But Central had the best performance to me. That's how I felt. I walked away loving what they did on every single aspect of the ball, right? It didn't matter of every side of the ball, excuse me. I thought that offense was good. I thought that defense was good. And oh my gosh, we need to talk about Juan Velarde, because I didn't speak about him on Monday, and that's my fault. I should have been taught. He's a secret MVP, quite frankly, because the way that he flipped the field against Alabama State, North Carolina Central's punter was phenomenal. He had 4 punts, 3 of which were inside the 20. And we're going to go through all 4 of them. Wait till you hear the one that wasn't inside the 20. It's incredible. So Velarde had a 56-yard punt on his first attempt to the 4-yard line, pinned them deep in their own territory. The next one, a 35-yarder to the 12-yard line. Then the next one was a 48-yarder to the 4-yard line again. So that's 3 inside the 20 and 2 inside the 5. All of them inside the 15. So now let's get to the one where he didn't have it inside the 20, because, oh my gosh, he didn't. It was 56 yards again to the 25. So you're talking about a fantastic leg. You're talking about a lot of accuracy. You're talking about that takes control. A 56-yarder to the 4-yard line. You're putting your whole leg into it, but you got to make sure that you get it just a clip up right there, because you don't want it to go into the end zone. If it goes 61 yards, it's like, okay, now it's to the 20. It's not as impressive. Juan Velarde had himself a game. And you know what? We don't give punters MVPs, but I'm going to say it. Next to Jamari Taylor, Juan Velarde is the MVP of the Orange Blossom Classic. But yeah, so you look really good on special teams in that aspect. You would have liked to not give away. You'd have liked to not give away a kick return for a touchdown. So you got to knock them for that. They also had a couple of good kickoff returns of their own. So they look like, as far as the field position battle, this is something that they could consistently win. You know, that punter is something special. Velarde is something special, especially with what he just did right there. Oh my gosh. And he's the kicker too. Offensively, Jamari Taylor looked like he could take over and be the best running back in Black college football. He really did. And the story of his performance is forced missed tackles. And I think when you say it that way, it makes it wonder, okay, how much of that was on Alabama State? And probably half of it. But he forced so many missed tackles that half of his missed tackles being forced by him and not bad technique on the other side is still a lot of missed tackles. I think that you've seen a lot of times where he had great vision. You saw a lot of times where he was elusive. You've seen a lot of times where he put the cut down, or he made his cut right at the right moment, right? Because you can make the cut early, you can react. These were swift moves. These were crisp moves. Like, when you really look at what Jamari Taylor was able to do, Jamari Taylor ran like a running back who was trying to show you, I can take over for Mookie. And that's what it looked like. That's what he did. He looked phenomenal. Like I said, MVP. 3 touchdowns, one of which was through the air. Speaking of through the air, Walker Harris didn't have the game that I think he wanted to have. I don't think he had the game that a lot of us expected him to have. He did have the first half that we expected him to have, though. So now with Walker Harris, it's about, who are you going to be more often? Are you going to be that first half quarterback, or are you going to be that second half quarterback? You know, time will go on. He'll have multiple games to really get into his groove, and we'll really get to see what he can be. I think that he can be that first half quarterback because they schemed open a lot of good throws. But one thing that he did was he saw that the middle of the field was open. This was on the first drive. He saw that the middle field was open, and he knew he was going to hit his guy up the seam immediately. Yes, there is a part of play calling that goes into that. You have to scheme up that play. But for him to make that decision so quickly, that shows you that he's making all the pre-snap reads that he needs to have. You know, every throw that's impressive, every play, that's what I should say. Every play that's impressive does not necessarily have to have an impressive throw attached to it. And that play that we saw with Walker Harris hitting the seams, that was an impressive play because it was a pre-snap decision. And that's what you have to applaud. Not throwing it into double coverage, not throwing it on the back shoulder, just an easy throw that was set up by understanding the defense. And then North Carolina Central's defense, they put points on the board. Anytime that your defense puts points on the board, it's a good day. They had a pick 6. I thought that they had a lot of penetration in the running game and in the passing game. I understand that Andrew Body's legs were a problem. There was some times when tackling was an issue for Central, but I didn't think that was frequent. Body just had a really good day. And that would be something that concerned me a little bit, that maybe you wouldn't be able to handle running quarterbacks. But I got to see it happen some more. They did so many good things that I don't want to say, oh, they just can't handle running quarterbacks. I think that they may have struggled with this guy this day. They may not have struggled with Body 2 weeks from now. But that day they did struggle with him. They did too many good things for me to say they wouldn't get that together, though. Man, I thought that they were really good. Also, offensively, the one thing I want to see from Central is I want to see them use their wide receivers on the perimeter, because they didn't attack Alabama State's cornerbacks at all, for real. I want to see them use that aspect because it just opens up the field a little bit. I know that he's going to operate in the middle, because if you watched our episode with Walker Harris, he talked about the middle of the field as far as depth and in the middle of the field as far as width. The rest of the top 5 goes Jackson State, FAMU, Alabama State, then Tennessee State. I expected Alabama State to drop. You lose, right? You didn't look great. You had a big quarterback debacle, or whatever you want to call that. I think it was an offensive failure on every single level. Coaching, execution, offensive line, quarterback play. Like, I just didn't think that it was a good performance at all. There was very little good that you could take from that. And the one little good you could take got injured. So, like, they were supposed to drop a decent amount. 4 is appropriate, if you ask me, even though I do feel like a lot of their issues are correctable. Then you had Tennessee State, who ran through Mississippi Valley State at 5. They moved in here. Howard dropped out. That's the only reason I'm mentioning this right here. Tennessee State moved into 5, the top 5. Howard dropped out. I think it's more about Tennessee State and less about Howard because Howard played Rutgers. Tennessee State played Mississippi Valley State. I don't know if that's a good team, but you dominate it, and that's what you're supposed to do. You can't control who is on your schedule, but we're going to talk about this at the end of the day. There's more than just wins and losses when we're truly evaluating. It's about how did you look, and they looked dominant. If you dominate a bad team, you get kudos for that. Just simply skating by a bad team, not necessarily. Now, speaking of a bad team that's trying to prove that they're a good team, Clark Atlanta. Now, I said that most times you don't get that jump immediately. That's not the case with Clark Atlanta. Let's look at the Keaton Wright era and how it started off with some explosive offense as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors, and eBay Motors is the only place that I would tell you to go for all of your car troubles or any of your car just improvements, enhancements. It doesn't really matter. On that side of things, you're looking at a alternator that's messed up. Okay, go get you an alternator. You know you're gonna have to do some routine maintenance. Maybe you need to get some spark plugs. It doesn't have to be big. It can be small things. It can be some lights. I always go with my LED lights. That's like my go-to with enhancements. You can do some things to improve the speed of your car. So whether you're looking at utility, style, speed, aesthetic, whatever you're looking at, eBay Motors has it for you. They have a guarantee fit, meaning that if it does not fit, you can get your money back, guaranteed, no questions asked. All you have to do is put your car, into the My Garage section. Maybe you have a 2004 Cadillac Escalade or something. You want to put it into the My Garage section, you'll get a part that is fitted for your 2004 Cadillac Escalade. It's just that simple. So go to ebaymotors.com and take care of your ride or die today. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked on College Football. Spencer McLaughlin has you covered with everything as we enter the week 2 of college football. There should be some games going on tomorrow. We'll have a full slate on Saturday. Got some big games too. So make sure you're checking out Spencer because he's giving you everything you need to know on something that you really need to know everything about. So just make sure you're checking him out for your second listen of the day. But right now, we're going into the Clark Atlanta era, right? The Keaton Wright Clark Atlanta era. And no, Keaton Wright is not a person. That's Teddy Keaton, the head coach, and David Wright, the quarterback. Both came in from Allen University, and they started off their tenure, their era, with an absolute bang. Explosive offense for days. Oh, my gosh. When you look at Wright was Wright is the reigning, defending SIAC Offensive Player of the Year. And when you look at what he was able to do to Fort Valley on Saturday, I think it's very difficult to say that he's not the favorite or shouldn't. It's a big lead, man. Like, he looks like a guy who is primed to be a 2-time SIAC Offensive Player of the Year despite a change of environment. That's what he looks like to me. In the beginning or midway through segment 1, really, I said, look, if people don't expect you to be good and you come out and have a big week 1, people are going to question whether or not it's a fluke. I'm on the fence on whether or not this applies to Clark Atlanta because depending on where you look, depends on how you feel about them. For example, Dr. Cavill said that they're the best D2 HBCU out there. If you subscribe to that, well, this performance is right on brand because they have a great offense, right? But then you have other people like the SIAC rankings. They don't have them that high. I think they're bottom 3, if I'm not mistaken. They improve a little bit, but they're definitely not at the top of the division or top of the conference. That's not where they are. So it depends on where you look. I've seen some people have some excitement here or there. Dr. Cavill was probably the most excited that I've seen somebody be. I think that I haven't seen best out from anywhere else, but I have seen kind of middle of the pack. I think I have seen that a little bit. But when you're looking at Clark Atlanta in week 1, you have to look at the 45 points that they scored all on offense. all off the arm of David Wright as far as the scoring plays. They really didn't run the ball that much, to be honest. That wasn't a big part of their offense. They didn't do it overly successfully. I don't think anybody reached 3 yards per carry. I know that nobody reached 4 yards per carry. So when you're looking at this offense, when you're looking at the 45 points, when you're looking at them with your eyes wide, you're looking at the passing game, because David Wright, like I said, is a player who is the reigning offensive player of the year in the conference. He transferred over from Allen University, but he stayed within the conference. So, of course, he's going to remain the favorite, and he showed why. It's hard to not be excited about what you saw from Clark Atlanta, because honestly, it's Atlanta, and I want to be excited in Atlanta. I know that doesn't necessarily matter as much, but certain areas is like, you know what? If Clark Atlanta became a must-see, I'm just gonna call him Clark. I don't know why I keep saying the Atlanta there, but you know who I'm talking about. If Clark became must-see, and that became a destination, it's different. It's different. No disrespect to any other schools, so I won't call any other areas out, but I'd want to make a trip out to Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would want to go to Atlanta, Georgia. But yeah, so let's look at how this happened, because it didn't start off great, right? Like, he missed his first 4 passes of the game. They went 3 and out twice, and on both 3 and outs, they ended up with a bad snap on the punting. Like that, when we talking about special teams for North Carolina Central, the hidden yardage battle is important. You don't notice these type of things, but you see it when it happens like that. When you can't get your punt off right. So now Fort Valley starts both of their first 2 possessions inside the red zone. If you're starting both of them inside the red zone, now that's easy work. That's easy work. And they go ahead and convert, and they get a touchdown. And now, halfway through the quarter, you're looking at Clark Atlanta down 14-0. So now the pressure's on. And I know if you Clark Atlanta, a team that didn't win a single game last year, this was their first victory since I'm just gonna say 2022, because I don't want to get the month wrong. But when you're looking at that, you probably like, man, here we go again, right? Hit him with the king. Here we go, right? That's probably what it feels like when you watch your first 2 drives go like that. It's like, man, we supposed to have an explosive quarterback. He's missing all his throws, right? We're supposed to have this, that, and the third. We're down 14-0 already. We're only 8 minutes into the season. But then after that, everything changed. David Wright may have missed his first 4 passes, but throughout the rest of the game, he only missed 4 more passes. He ended up 23 for 31, 423 yards all through the air, of course, and then 7 touchdowns. Oh, my gosh. I got to start handing out more graphics. I do. But the problem with the graphics is I need pictures. If you ever, you know what? This is for all my everydayers. If you own the right to pictures, please send them to me. Because for a lot of our universities, getting pictures that I can actually have permission to use, right? Because we don't want to get copyrighted. But having permission for images is actually very difficult for a lot of universities. I need to say that earlier in the show, because we're about 20 minutes in. But yeah, if you have rights to any pictures, send them to me. And if I can use them, I will. I promise you. And if I say if I can, I mean as far as just how it works out. But David Wright, man, 23 for 31, 423 yards, 7 touchdowns. And those 7 touchdowns basically came on consecutive drives. The only one that they didn't score on was a 1-play kneel down to end the half. This is 7 consecutive drives of just pure offensive efficiency. And it didn't matter if it was methodical. It didn't matter if it was explosive, because, boy, they had some explosive plays. And when you're looking at 423 yards through the air, of course, you're going to have multiple big-time yardage getters. You just expect that. Jamal Jones, seven catches, 136 yards, 2 touchdowns. You're looking at Armani Harris, 7 catches, 118 yards, 2 touchdowns. You're looking at Virgil Young. He had 4 catches for 84 yards, and that's 2 touchdowns on top of that. So you're looking at him. He's averaging 20 yards per catch. You're looking at the other 2, not quite 20, but definitely above 15, above 16. Yeah. So they're above 16 yards per carry. So, like, when you're just looking at these guys, and I think Jones may have been he's at 19 some change. So you're looking at Young 20 plus, right? He's about 21 yards per catch. Jamal Jones, he's a little bit under 20. He's at 19 and some change. You're looking at Armani Harris. He's about 16, right? Like he's nearly at 17. When you're really looking at these guys, that's explosive offense. That's explosive offense. David Wright had 423 yards with 7 touchdowns. You had 3 players with 2 touchdowns apiece. One guy averaging 21 yards per carry. One guy averaging, 21 yards per catch. You had another guy averaging 19 yards per catch. You had another guy averaging nearly 17 yards per catch. When you're looking at that, like really look at that offense. 7 touchdowns through the air, immaculate. A player with 21 yards per catch, you'll take it. A player with 19 yards per catch, you'll take it. A player with 17 yards per catch or a little bit less than that, you'll take it. To have all 4 of those things happen in one game is ridiculous. 4 of the touchdowns that you had were over 20 yards. Every single person who caught a pass for more than 20 yards. You're looking at one of the touchdowns being 19. So you had nearly half of your passing touchdowns be explosive plays. This is incredible offensive display. I don't know what it looks like moving forward, but to have this start off like this, that's what you're looking for. That's what you're looking for if you're a Clark Atlanta fan, and that's what you got. So next week, trust me, I think Wright and Keaton will be pretty excited to play their former university. It's not as if they left with bad blood, or I don't know about Keaton, but Wright probably just went with his coach. So I don't know if there's bad blood there, but you definitely don't want to lose to the place that you just came from, whether it's beef, whether it's Plex, or whatever it could be, right? It could just be bragging rights at the end of the day. It doesn't have to be anything negative, but you don't want to lose. So we're going to look at that next week because I think that Clark Atlanta is going to be a team that you talk about more than anybody else on the Division II level if they continue to sustain this level of success. Now, as we push forward, we're going to look at the attitude between FBS and D2 games, both involving HBCUs, not FBS versus D2, but HBCUs versus both of those entities as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, here's the thing about FanDuel. Here is the thing about FanDuel. To me, I'm looking at them as a very generous entity because if you put down a $5 bet, they're going to give you 3 weeks free of the NFL Sunday ticket right before football season. What are we talking about? This is something you can't beat. Put down a $5 bet, a very low risk wager, and you get 3 weeks free of NFL Sunday ticket. Anybody who's ever had Sunday ticket will tell you how much of a great investment that is. I mean, I have it. I can tell you right now, if I could get 3 weeks free of it, I would take it if I were you. So that being said, go ahead and go to FanDuel.com. Put some money down on the NFL action that's coming up. Kansas City versus Baltimore on Thursday. Green Bay versus Philadelphia in Brazil on Friday. It's all there for you. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com. Use the FanDuel.com/locked on. It's FanDuel.com/locked on. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. We're going to close out this with a little bit of a conversation about FBS versus Division II games. Now, on Tuesday, you had the SWAC media call, and I sat there and I listened to it, and Maynard popped it off. Not only was he the first person, but he also brought up the idea of playing a Division II team first, because that's who Alabama A&M plays this week. And the way that he spoke about it, I said, yeah, supposed to feel like that. It's a drastically different attitude in how we treat these FBS games and how we treat these D2 games. When it comes to an FBS game, we look at it as a long shot. Just generally. I'm not talking about fans. I mean, I'm not talking about coaches and players. I'm talking about fans. How it's spoken about. It changes depending on where that FBS team is. If it's a Power 4 school, yeah, wrap it up. If it's a group of 5 school, completely different conversation, right? Like those are the games where you feel like, oh, you might be able to get them. Those are the games we really talk about. You know, like we're not talking about UAPB versus Arkansas going into the game. I'm not talking about it coming out of the game. The biggest thing that came from it was the Arkansas player waving at the UAPB cheerleader. And quite frankly, nobody talked about the fact that she looked like she was like, oh my gosh, like she enjoyed it. Like she like, yeah, hey, where's the loyalty at? Huh? Where's the loyalty at with that one? No, I'm joking. But that was live. Shout out to the Arkansas player because I would have done the same thing. Yeah, they don't see cheerleaders like that on campus, I guess. But when you're looking at it, man, It's a perfect time to have this conversation because week 1 to week 2 is drastically different. No HBCUs played a Division II squad in week 2. I mean, week 1, but you have multiple in week 2. So in week 1, it was all FBS. You had Howard versus Rutgers, Norfolk State versus East Carolina, Grambling versus University of Louisiana, Alabama A&M versus Auburn, Bethune-Cookman versus South Florida, Jackson State versus Louisiana Monroe, Alcorn versus UAB, UAPB versus Arkansas. That's 8 teams. 8 HBCUs playing an FBS opponent, 6 in the SWAC, 2 in the MEAC. This doesn't include the week 0 matchup of Delaware versus Hawaii. If you really wanted to add that in there, you could. No one played D2 this week. Got about the same amount of D2 games as you had FBS last week. Howard versus Mercyhurst. Technically, Mercyhurst moved up to the Division I level this year. They played one game as a FCS opponent or as an FCS team, but we won't count it. But I'm pretty sure that was made when they were still a Division II squad. So Norfolk State versus Virginia State, Bama State versus Miles, UAM. What am I talking about? Alabama A&M versus Kentucky State, Grambling versus Tuskegee, Southern versus Savannah State, Jackson State versus Lane, UAPB versus Arkansas Baptist, right? That's a switch. One game in the MEAC, 6 in the SWAC, 7 total. And it's almost the same 6 teams. Take out a few, you know what I'm saying? But you still have TSU versus Rice, FAMU versus Miami, Alcorn versus Vanderbilt. So that the FBS games are still there. But when it comes to FBS opponents, we look and we say, oh, that's a long shot. No way. But when it comes to D2, why we don't spark? Well, when it comes to FBS, we always talk about it being a long shot. But why, when it comes to D2, we don't talk about just dominating? Like, why is that not the conversation? That's what Maynard said. Alonzo Hampton of UAPB came back and said the same thing. I thought that Terrence Graves had the best way to look at it. He said, you got to go out there and take care of business. We expect to dominate, of course. This is now me. You expect to dominate, of course, but you got to actually go out there and take care of it. So I think that you could take Maynard, you could take Hampton as kind of like Alonzo Hampton, not the university, but Alonzo Hampton, head coach of UAPB. You could take them as kind of overconfidence, kind of overlooking if you wanted to. With Graves, is like, hey, we know what we're supposed to do. We got to go out there and do it. But that should be the attitude. Nobody ever talks about this. Like, no one ever really talks about the D2 games. Like, we supposed to go out there and smash. That's what's supposed to happen. I don't care if it's a D2 HBCU. I don't care if it's a D2 PWI. You are an FCS opponent. You are up a subdivision. You are supposed to go down there and smash them. Of course, sometimes it doesn't happen. I'm not ignorant of the fact. There might be a team that gets upset this week, but it's an upset. Anytime a D2 team plays an FCS team and they win, it's an upset, period. That's what happens. North Dakota State, one of the best FCS teams out here. If they were to go play a group of 5 school, I'm sure they could beat them. I don't think they would be favorited. It would be an upset. And that group of 5 team is supposed to beat them most times. They play by different rules. When you're at the top of a lower subdivision, playing somebody in the middle to lower in the subdivision above you, that's a different conversation. I don't know if that really exists here, to be honest. Like, I don't think the SIAC, I don't think that the CIAA, like, I don't think they're at the top of the Division II rankings. They got good teams. Don't get me wrong. Got good teams, but in the playoff, they haven't been there as of recently with as much success. I don't know if they're playing the top of the line PWI schools, but what I will say is that you're supposed to smash. You're supposed to win. So at the end of the day, if that's not what you're doing, I do think you are failing. When it comes to evaluation, I'm not looking at your games against FBS opponents like, oh, did you win? No? Trash. Like, we don't do that. We don't. We sit there and we look in between. We read between the lines. I look at a Kenny Gallup. And I'm like, oh, wow, this guy was really hooping against Rutgers. Howard may have a good defense again this year. Like, you start taking little things. You look for attributes. The same shit happened with Division II opponents. If I'm playing a Division II, and I understand, look, this is kind of a superiority complex type of conversation. That's fine. But I can guarantee you, when that SEC school, when that ACC school comes and plays a MEAC or a SWAC opponent, if they come and they play anybody in the FCS, which they do frequently at the beginning of their seasons, I can guarantee you they expect to smash you every single time. More so than any other. Of course, you expect to win every game, but they expect to smash the lower subdivision. That is what is expected. Even if you're on the group of 5 level, I don't know if the attitude is smash, but the attitude is you're supposed to win and probably win confidently, not supposed to squeak by. Like, this is the attitude. It should be the attitude on the FCS level going against D2 opponents. That's what it should be. And I'm sorry, I don't think it's cool to say here because we have D2 HBCUs. And when it comes to rivalry games, I think tradition, like I think those play a different, kind of different. The heated rivalry in it kind of takes out the attitude of which I'm speaking with, right? So, like, if it's a rivalry game between an FCS opponent and a D2 opponent, okay, we'll change the rules for that. But it's not always a rivalry game. Sometimes you're just playing the D2 opponent. And I know that we have D2 HBCUs, and it's like I'm putting them down or whatever. I don't care right now. I don't think that's what I'm doing. But the point is, you're on a different subdivision. You're supposed to do that. Maynard said it, and I agree. Does it always happen? No. But that should be the attitude. And it should be the attitude of fans. I don't understand why we don't have this attitude more often. Maybe you want to be kind because there's HBCUs that you're facing on that level. But doggone it, if Texas Southern goes to play Kentucky State, I expect them to walk them. I do. I just do. So yeah, now it'd been fun, like a South Carolina State versus a Benedict College. That would have been fun. I maybe wouldn't have had the same "you're gonna walk them" conversation, right? Like I maybe wouldn't have had that if Virginia Union comes up and plays a FCS HBCU. I may not have that same feeling with Virginia State. There are Division II teams who are exempt of this, but a general blanket statement: we do not approach FCS HBCU games versus Division II opponents the same way that FBS schools approach playing us, and we should, because it's the same dynamic, in my opinion. Let me know. I was pretty convicted in those feelings, so I would love to know if you agree or disagree. But that'll be on tomorrow's episode. Or excuse me, on tomorrow's episode, we'll look at next week. We'll look at the upcoming games on Saturday. We'll preview some of the games that are not our game of the week. I'm still a little bit split. I don't know which angle I want to go with our game of the week, but I will make that decision by tomorrow and announce it on tomorrow's episode. So in the meantime, in between time, until next time we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.